All right. Well, hello. Welcome back to Atheist Edge, everyone. Hope you are all doing well out there, staying safe, staying healthy. A lot going on these days. A lot of good reasons to watch YouTube and get your mind off of it. But we are joined here today by Alien Milsrow. He is found him in the wild world of YouTube, and he has a an interesting view on God, which we're going to discuss a little bit and see if we can get that figured out a little bit. So, thank you, sir, for joining us. Why don't you tell our audience kind of a little bit about yourself, kind of what your religious background is, and what got you inspired to start doing a YouTube channel?
Sure. So in terms of what got me interested in doing a channel, I am a philosophy major. I'm a college undergraduate right now. I'm a junior, and so I wanted to have an opportunity to sort of both use this as a way of figuring out my own ideas, but also have an ability to sort of share those with the broader world. In terms of my own religious background, I was brought up Jewish. I was brought up by people who are neither of my parents are sort of strictly believe in God, but they certainly brought me up going to religious school, brought me up doing sort of religious events throughout my. So I was bar mitzvah. I went to Shabbat kinds of dinners and stuff. But I don't think of myself at this point as being particularly Jewish. I do think of myself at this point as being uh, uh, involved, I think, um, with religious things and involved more, I would say, with theistic thinking.
Okay, so getting back into the content of your video, I was interested when
Yeah.
Jim sent it to me because it is very provocatively titled "Atheists Are Stupid and Wrong," which is a great way to get views, I suppose. Um, and just for the people who have not seen your video, and I'm sure we'll link your channel in the description so people can
Sure.
watch it for themselves. But for our purposes here, why don't you give us kind of the short version as to what your view of God is and what you're
Yeah,
getting across?
absolutely. So yeah, I would describe myself as focusing on I was having an interesting conversation uh, about this um, early on Thursday, maybe it was Wednesday, I'm not quite remember. Um, but I would think of evolutions happening at the level of the allele, not at the level of the individual animal, but the level of genetics itself, right? And so when we're talking about it in that context, it's actually not happening at just the cell; it's happening because of the cell in these collective groups of cells, right? And one of those collective groups that they get together in order to be able to succeed collectively is
Hmm.
called an animal or a plant, right? But another one that I claim would be that they get together as groups of animals, or they get together as groups of plants. So that could be an ecosystem, that could be a city, larger groups that don't just end at the point that we are. And then if that's the case, that would eventually sort of, if you're zooming it all the way up, that every single cell in the entire world has some degree of desire for the universe as a whole to succeed. And if that's the case, then that um, would be an argument to say that the universe as a whole is alive.
Okay. I'm not sure if we lost maybe something at the very beginning of that,
Mhm.
but I'm interested. 'Cause I think we probably where we would agree, we would have no issue with talking about uh, cells or animals or organisms operating as a collective to
Mhm.
accomplish greater things. You talk a little bit about ants in your video and the hive mind or swarm intelligence that colonies can possess, whereas the individual ants are not super intelligent, but they get together and they organize themselves in a way where they can do more. Human beings, you talk about New York City, that was
Yep.
built not on the efforts of one person, but people putting their efforts together for a common goal. Now, where I think we may start differing a little bit is once you get beyond that level, and just use the
Mhm.
phrase to desire for the universe as a whole to succeed
Yeah.
from many levels. Can Can you
Sure,
back that up with being able to
sure.
with any kind of evidence for it?
Sure. So I think the way I would describe it is, if I use the word desire, that may be a little bit more provocative than I want to get just yet.
Hmm.
Um, the reason for that is that when you say desire, you're suggesting a sort of um, uh, consciousness about
Right.
it, right?
Hmm.
Um, but I do think that it is clearly in the genetic interest of every single cell in the universe for the universe to succeed, right?
To a certain extent, I mean, we would. I mean, evolutionarily, just on the
Hmm.
being level, not going on more than that. I mean, I think that instinctually, we all have a desire for our own survival. If we didn't, we would have died out long ago. I'm not sure if you could say that the cells that are part of a being have that kind of like cells replicate themselves. That's just what they
Hmm.
do. There's
Hmm.
not a lot of thought put into that. That's just their. I don't want to use the word programming because creationists would have a field day with that, but
Sure.
that's just what they do. That's what they do genetically, and
Yeah.
human beings. We're in a situation right now where we may be fighting for survival more consciously than we may
Hmm.
have
Hmm.
in the
Sure.
past. But for the universe as a whole, I'm not sure you can show that, you know, you or I or any given animal necessarily uh, has that as a goal for the universe to be successful. If anything else, individuals can be very short sighted and
Yeah.
focused on their own survival more often than not, unless we're talking about something like a more deeper fundamental level.
Sure. Yeah, so I think that when you were talking about the coronavirus, I think that was actually a pretty good example. If you wanted to claim it as an emergent property rather than something that is actually true of every single cell, I'd be pretty comfortable with that. So, um, is every single person on Earth particularly focused on a particular day on the aggregate value, like the aggregate effect on the entire Earth? Well, no. However, when something like coronavirus happens and it's affecting the global population, now all of a sudden we do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing similarly, if this is a serious sort of public health issue, something that we're focusing on a daily basis, both as a Earth-wide, humanity-wide kind of thing, but also at a citywide level, also at a sort of town-wide level. So that is an emergent property. It's not like your cells, your individual cells, necessarily care that much, but collectively they do.
So, but let's take that a level further. I mean,
Sure,
we can
sure.
talk about human civilization as a whole, but let's get galactic with it. Let's get universal with it because I mean,
Yeah.
we have okay. It's in our collective best interest. I think we could say that okay, even not in a given moment, but collectively we want the Earth to succeed.
Hmm.
That's why people are concerned about climate change. If the Earth does not succeed, then we all die unless we
Hmm.
find a way to get elsewhere very quickly. Um, so I could see something up to that point, but I guess maybe two conflicts. One, the universe doesn't really care particularly if we succeed, and I don't know if we can necessarily exert an effect on the universe that could make it fail. Like we could
Hmm.
screw up this planet a whole lot.
Yeah.
We could nuke it to oblivion. We could make the climate change so it's uninhabitable. There's all sorts of things we could do to this planet. But to say that anything in particular cares if the universe is successful, that implies that we can have an effect on the universe that
Hmm.
uh, could influence whether it succeeds or fails, if I'm making sense there.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Do you care if a particular skin cell in your body dies?
I have this one particular on my finger. Its name is Ricky, and
Yeah.
we're pretty tight. We've been together a while. No,
Right, but
I see what you're
Ricky's
saying.
friend George, if George dies, you don't really care if George dies, right? You're going to be fine even if the individual cell dies. I think similarly, the universe doesn't really care that much about a particular planet. It certainly doesn't care about a particular animal, right?
Right. But to the second point, then,
Yeah.
um, what can we make the universe fail? Like, what would a fail state of the universe even look like?
Yeah, so I think that you could de-evolve, if you will, the universe, and that would be a failure, right? So right now, I would describe the universe as being chock full of life. I'm relatively confident that we're not the only life on in the universe. That is to say, the life on Earth. And if that's the case, that would suggest that this is a universe that is chock full of life. That is not the case, hypothetically, of every single multiverse, right?
Hmm.
And so I would describe ours as being currently one that is a God quote unquote universe, which is to say an evolved universe. And then there are other universes that are not quote unquote God universe, ones that are chock full of life. The way you kill God, the way that you destroy the universe, is by killing all the life in the universe.
Okay, so let's get into that because I think
Mhm.
that's another area that Team Atheist is going
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
have some issue with. What is your? I don't think you actually got to it in the video you have out currently, but you're positing a view of God. You have something that you're calling God.
Mhm.
What is the definition of God that you are proposing to the atheist should consider?
Sure. I think there's two different ones. So there's one that I think sort of low level amounts of God, if you will,
Mhm.
which would be sort of that it's capable of performing tasks and making up new tasks, which is the way I would describe intelligence generally. And then the second level would be that I would describe it as being omnipotent or materially indistinguishable, if you will, between it and being something that is omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient.
Okay, so now apply that to the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Because compared with like you or I,
Mm-hmm.
we fit your definition of intelligence. I think you may have used the same definition for sentience in your
Yep.
video, but
Yep. Exactly
there's
right.
probably overlap there.
Yep.
Um, the
Yeah.
uni-
To clarify, go for it.
no, if you were going to clarify your
Yeah, to
definition.
clarify, so I would define intelligence as being something that exists on a spectrum. I would consider life as being a relatively early on point on that spectrum. I'd consider sentient as being something that we've also arbitrarily cut off on that spectrum, and I'd describe God as something that we've arbitrarily cut off on that same spectrum.
Okay, so if we're cutting things off, how do we show that a planet or a universe is
Mhm.
sentient in the same way that you or I would be considered sentient by most people?
How are we sentient?
Well, you're talking about, we have the ability to, if we're putting it in terms of tasks,
Mhm.
you or I can go out and, like this morning, I set myself a goal to go to the grocery store early, and I did that, and I couldn't find what I wanted. So then I set myself a new task to go to the next grocery store, which was shadier, but may have been picked over less. So there's kind of I'm trying to operate by your
Yeah,
definition a little bit here. So
yeah,
correct me if
absolutely,
I'm getting any of
absolutely.
that
No,
wrong.
that's
But
good. That's good. Yeah. So in terms of yeah, I misunderstood. I thought you were suggesting that we had a different form of intelligence, and but that's fine. So in terms of what does the Earth do? The Earth does a lot of things. The Earth, for example, figures out, or I shouldn't say figures out, because that suggests a particular kind of intelligence. But it shifts the way that where water is going to be. Right? It shifts it ensures the ozone layer is staying relatively stable. It shifts, and obviously we've screwed that up. But generally, there's a lot of things that the Earth does collectively, and the way that that's done, of course, is by individual animals, individual plants, right? And so individual plants can actually screw themselves over in helping to mediate, helping to keep stable the ozone layer, helping to keep stable the entire universe, or excuse me, the entire Earth.
if we're talking
In the
about
same.
if we're talking about
Mhm.
things like water, that that can be described in terms of physics, right? There's not necessarily a agent taking action to move the water around on the earth, if I'm understanding where you're getting from on that.
Mhm.
So, I mean, you can describe them in terms of a system, like we could talk about water and climate and plate tectonics, and these are all activities that are taking place on the planet Earth, but to say that they are a task implies that there is a some sort of entity that is assigning those tasks and not just the
Mhm.
blind physical forces that pervade the entire universe and act on us every day.
Yeah, so I'm curious. When you say that you went to um, uh, the supermarket earlier today,
Mm-hmm.
was that you or was that a clump of cells?
That was the clump of cells that collectively is known as me.
Okay. So when Earth-wide humanity right now is attacking um, coronavirus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that strikes me as being something that the humans, the individual animals that are a part of the Earth, if you will, or at least part of humanity, um, are acting collectively, right?
Yep.
In the same way as those cells. So
Sure.
you're suggesting that collection, that Earth, isn't counted as an actor, a single actor, right? But it strikes me as just as much a single actor, which is to say that collection, as you are, which is to say a collection.
Well, I think we have may have a different. Was I was kind of up to agreement in your video as far as like emergence properties from.
Mhm.
Well, we're kind of going between living and non-living things now, and maybe that's where the difference is because I can get behind um, the collective action or emergent behavior of an ant colony or a bee swarm, comparing that with the activity of neurons in the brain, for instance. In fact, that's a way that artificial intelligence is being developed by trying to imitate some of those forms from nature. But when we start bringing in non-living forces, uh, that's when the analogy would seem to break down, I would think, because there's no such
Uh,
emergent behavior from the waves of the ocean. There's like I said, it's being acted. We can explain these systems on Earth in terms of like pure physics. There's not a need to ascribe any sort of collective action to that. It's like adding one explanation too many. We've already kind of got it down.
hmm. I guess I'm a little confused as okay. So correct me if I'm wrong. I'm hearing this as you're saying that um, because Earth includes non-living things, that it doesn't count as being alive.
Not in the. I don't think. I'm trying to. Part of this is me trying to understand where you're
Sure,
getting
absolutely.
from.
Yeah.
So if I'm misstating anything, then by all means let me know. Like because everything in your video is talking about um, living things and collections of living things and cells, and part of the problem too is that the definition of life is a little bit fuzzy in places. Um,
Absolutely.
like there's a question of whether viruses
Hmm.
technically count as alive. I know I've heard before, um, I think that once we start getting to the level where we start, okay, okay, well let's do this. Since we're talking let's keep things at the God level because I think that we're kind of talking in circles around the earth when the big question here is much larger.
Hmm.
So if we're talking about the universe as God, so you're saying that the universe is a sentient thing. Have I
Mhm.
got that right?
Yep.
That can assign tasks, create new tasks. Is it assigning tasks to us in any sense? Like, is it delegating things?
Well, so that's why, yeah. So that's why the idea of delegation, I think, is a little bit um, complicated because it's not so much that like your cells report to you; it's that
Mm-hmm.
you are your cells, right? So it's like when I say that the universe is doing something, what I really just mean is the collective of life in the universe is doing something. In the same manner that when I say you are doing something, what I really mean is just a bunch of cells within you are doing something. So like you can say, I mean, there's apoptosis. There's clear evidence that the collective of cells can sort of force individual cells to do certain things,
Mm-hmm.
certain cells are willing to die on behalf of the collective, which is also true of ants. But like that's a separate point than the idea of it being dictated down. It's not quite a top down approach in my mind.
Okay, so we're not getting anything delegated to us. We are, but by the collective action of cells up to beings, up to civilizations, planets, we are taking actions unto ourselves and assigning tasks unto ourselves as a civilization or what have you.
Yeah, I
And,
mean, yeah, that's a way. I mean, okay, so here's an example. This is back down to the city level, so I apologize that it's not the universe level. But we okay. There's nothing fundamental by which driving on the left side of the road or right side of the road is sort of morally wrong, right?
right.
However, we've dictated as a society, in every single society in the world, one of those is correct in this society, right? And so that's a dictate. That's a sort of you can call it at this point from a perspective of me as an individual. It's a top down dictate. It's
Mm-hmm.
a society is telling me as an individual to do that one thing, right?
Sure.
So I guess you could call that a dictate, but it's also again that law was created by humans. It's not like that just sort of like happened. It's that a bunch of humans got together and decided that that was going to be the way that we did it.
Okay. Um, so then, where does the God thing come in? 'Cause it sounds like everything that we're talking about now can like we can use the same terminology uh, of like I've been able to describe all this, trying to sort through this issue. I've been able to talk about this in terms of the universe,
Mm-hmm.
and we haven't had to evoke a God concept yet. So I mean, from our side, no, I'd be pretty comfortable after a little bit of thought with thinking about the universe and how we all have a place in it in the grand scheme of things operationally. But the God term, that there's a kind of preconceived
Sure,
definition of that. So why not stick with calling it the universe and why bring God
absolutely.
into it at all?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I would define, and if you disagree with this definition, we can definitely get into that. But I would define God, this is a sort of Judeo-Christian definition of it. I would define it as being omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient. So like it's everywhere. And yeah, would you disagree with any of those?
Well, let's work through that for the universe.
Well,
Omnipresent. I mean,
before we do that, could we just agree to that as a definition?
I can work with that definition for this
Okay,
discussion.
cool,
Yeah.
awesome. Okay,
So if we're talking about omnipresent, then yeah, the universe is everything. So it's going to be everywhere. To and to my knowledge, it doesn't sound like you were asserting another realm
hmm,
besides the universe where a
yep,
god would
correct.
reside. So yeah, I'm fine with that. Omnipotent. Are you now? There are things that, as far as we now, we don't know everything about the universe, obviously,
Hmm.
but there seems like there would be certain things that the universe can't do. Trying to think off the top of my head, it can't create universe. It can't create a new universe. It can't violate its own laws of physics. It seems like the universe operates in certain ways and it doesn't violate those ways.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, yeah, that's reasonable. So I apologize if I didn't make this clear. Do I think that it's actually omnipresent, that it's actually omnipotent or actually omniscient? No. Do I think that it is materially indistinguishable from the perspective of us as humans? I think it is.
okay, so if it's so saying it's indistinguishable from the human perspective
Mhm.
implies that there's more to it than that.
Yeah, yeah. So I would describe this is going to get a little bit like woo-woo potentially,
Okay.
but I would describe you from the perspective of your cells as being God,
In what fashion?
in the fashion that you are omnipotent, that you are comparatively omniscient, and that you are comparatively omnipresent, or obviously you are from their perspective omnipresent.
Doesn't that kind of dilute the word God a little bit? Like I get that from a analogy because
Mhm.
we use that linguistically. We'll say, "Oh, this person was playing God" or something like that. And in much the same way that if we went 200 years ago and showed people in Salem, Massachusetts, of a teleconference conversation
Yeah,
from 2,000 miles away, they would probably think that we were gods
which is kind of the point,
because of that
right?
perspective. But by the same time, we are objectively not God. Um,
Why do you say
on
that?
well, if we're talking, if God is a matter of perspective, then we kind of lose all. Then God becomes very ill-defined because God becomes relative.
Sure, but you're relative, right?
I'm relative, but I don't call myself God.
Right, but you call yourself a human. You call yourself an animal. But an
Right,
animal
but
is something, yeah,
that's more specific. Like what we can call things human and animal to distinguish them from wolf and plant and other things like that. But if we're
right.
just talking about like a
Well, so
title,
that's
then it seems like we would have better words to describe that because God has a lot of baggage
yeah.
associated with it, and it may take and words are flexible,
Mhm.
but it may take a little bit of time before God can be diluted to just whatever is incomprehensible to some other less sophisticated entity.
Okay, so here's the way I would describe it. Let's say I have a Minecraft, right? I have a Minecraft account and I'm playing in it. Um, and I'm able to do literally anything I want. I can break the rules of anything
Okay.
and just like drop blocks wherever I want. Um, and you're one of the little sheep in Minecraft, right?
Yep. I'm
I can do
square. I'm
literally
white.
any, yeah. So I can do literally anything I want to you, right? I'm omnipresent, I'm omniscient, and I'm omnipotent from the
Mm-hmm.
perspective of you, right?
Sure.
So within the confines of that game, I'm God. I'm assuming we're playing in like free play or whatever it's called.
Okay.
Okay, so in the confines of the universe, if the universe is God, or excuse me, if the universe is a sentient being, um, and the universe is omnipotent and omnipresent and omniscient, in the context of that universe, surely the universe is just as much God as I am in the context of that game.
Well, at the same, well, I think the difference would be in the context of the game, you are separate from the game itself. Like you are not the game Minecraft. You are a individual agent in the framework of Minecraft who is using the tools available within the game to screw with a poor innocent sheep, i.e., me.
Mhm.
Whereas in if we're talking about the universe, there isn't that separation. The in the same way it would be. in the example, it would be Minecraft, and that's it. It's all that there is. There's no outside entity. What would more traditionally be considered God would be an outside entity screwing with the universe or making all the things happen or whatnot. But that doesn't sound like what you're proposing.
Yeah, I guess I'm struggling with that definition because when we describe, like, we say your cells, we say your atoms inside of you, um, but we're describing like the atoms are you, and you are the cells, you are the atoms, right? So like when we're describing an animal, we don't demand that definition. So I guess I'm confused why we demand that definition of God.
Well, because we don't need. If we want to talk about the, I'm trying to think of the best words to how to put it. Like if we're talking about me,
Hmm.
um, if we're like general like, are you okay? Maybe I've got this. Are you talking if we call this? Are you a pantheist by this definition?
What exactly? Probably, but I want to hear what you mean by that.
That God is co-equal with the universe and everything that it contains.
Co-equal. Um, I don't see a distinction. What's the distinction?
Well, that's what I'm trying to. I think that's
Yeah,
part of the confusion because I would say to a woo woo pantheist, you're calling God the universe, and you're saying that. Okay, I thought of another question I need to ask you, but I'll get to that in a second. You're,
mhm,
you're saying that God and universe are synonymous. Uh, you're just adding an extra word onto something that we already have a word for and all the
sure.
baggage that comes with it. And like not like I could just as easily say God is this can of cherry vanilla Coke zero sugar.
What
And
what what increased information would you get by using God is that Coca-Cola can?
none. That's the
Right.
problem.
But I think
Um,
there's a
so but you think your idea does give more information.
oh sure. I
Okay.
think I would never describe a universe that doesn't have life in it as being God.
Okay, so God is a sum total of the life in the universe,
Hmm.
or the
The same way that you're a sum total of the cells in your body.
okay, that's better. I think it took us a half an hour to finally get understand what
Sure,
a
sure,
little bit
sure.
better what you're talking about. Okay, um, I think I still have some of the same questions or some of the same objections because now we just kind of move the bar down, and we still uh, have the question of why would we call life God instead of just life? Like what does okay if we're talking about what is adding information here by
Mhm.
that justifies using these additional terms, what do we get out of calling life God that we
Well,
don't just get?
yeah. So can we first agree that there's a need for a different label for a living universe versus a not living universe?
Sure, we could just call it a living universe as
Okay.
opposed to a dead universe.
Okay. So there's a need to use it as a living universe. What's the distinction between the not in terms of like the actions that God has done,
Hmm.
but in terms of the actions that God is capable of doing between the sum total of all life, right, in the universe
Hmm.
versus sort of the Christian, Judeo-Christian, whatever you want to call it, definition of God. Again, I'm not saying like that the specific things that it's done are legitimate. I'm just saying the potential to do such things.
Well, the Christian God, if the Christian God is a separate thing outside of the universe that supposedly has the ability to interfere in the activity of that universe to create life, for example, or stop the sun in the sky, or add a lot of water to flood a world, so on and so forth. Whereas life, at least as we know it in this universe, um, we don't have nearly that kind of capability. Like, to use your Minecraft example, we would be at the level of the player characters, where we can where the life that's in the universe can go around and build things and mine and make tracks and make little computer type things in the world of the game, but we would not be able to step outside the game and change the rules. That requires someone on the outside with the cheat codes and the God mode, appropriately called in this case,
Ah,
to go around and mess with the settings.
so the difference between God in your mind as a Christian conception or Jewish conception, whatever. We're just going to go Christian, just because most people are Christian. Um, uh, from the Christian perspective, is that God can use cheat codes. It can break the game,
Yeah, it sounds about right.
and that's the only distinction.
That's the first one that comes to mind. There may be more, but
Okay, okay, that's fine. So let's go into that distinction. Um, it can use cheat codes. I would describe making pig flies. So actually, this is something that you wrote about it on your blog, which I thought was interesting.
mhm.
You had like three sort of challenges for theists, and one of yours was to write a message. Is the third one of your last piece on Sleeping in Sunday's blog, which is wonderful, by the way.
Mhm. Oh, thank you.
Um, it says a message written on the moon in the native language of every reader. Not a big deal, right? The moon is visible to the world over, which would make it the perfect divine billboard. I'm not sure most skeptics would bring up the possibility of alien technology, quoting Arthur C. Clarke all the way. Well, yeah, alien technology, right?
Hmm.
That seems like a cheat code, right? Like we used to like the equivalent of what you demanded would have been, make pig fly, make the pigs fly, 200 years ago. But now we literally do have pigs flying, right? We just have them in these giant metal cans with fire shooting out of their wings, and we call them airplanes. And
Hmm.
we obviously there's technology behind them, but it's indistinguishable. There's no difference between God in that conception, breaking the rules of the universe and being so good at the rules of the universe that it's indistinguishable from breaking the rules of the universe.
Well, it's a little well. We still have the issue that the Christian conception of God is a being that's outside of and above everything else. Um, to keep with the Minecraft example, which I like because
Sure.
nerd, but there's people like I've messed with Minecraft a little bit, and I'm still operating on a caveman level of stone tools, whereas there are other people in the game who are making recreations of other games within the game, but there's stuff which blows my mind. It would be, I assume, magic uh, by my character's technological standards. But they're still like it's amazing what they can do within the rules of the game, but they're still within the rules of the game, right? Like we if we want to go back and we could blow some caveman minds with a cigarette lighter, much
Sure.
less a laser or a gun or a car or something like that. But we're still operating by the rules of the universe. We just know them better. Whereas the Christian God can supposedly rewrite the rules, and he could make it where you don't need oxygen to burn things, or water will float, or you could make flying skyfish that don't need to breathe. Uh, so that's a little bit different than
How would God do those things?
that's a great question for the Christians. Um,
No, I think it's a great question for you,
yeah,
right? Like, how would God do those things?
he supposedly he has the ability to. I mean, that this is where the omni characteristics come in.
Hmm.
He can just do anything,
Because he's
supposedly.
omniscient.
Right. He can just.
Yeah, he knows how to do everything.
Yeah. It's not even an act of volition for him. He just He doesn't even think about it. He just does. He's pure
Right.
act.
Right. So
So
why can't he do that while following the rules of the universe? By the way, I don't love the he. I would call it it or they.
I know.
But yeah, go on.
Um, because as far as we know, caveat, as far as we know, the laws of the universe don't permit it. We have gravity that would keep a fish from floating, and fish, all living things that we're aware of, require oxygen to breathe, and fish require water. Um, Fire requires oxygen. Uh, that's just chemistry. And
Mhm.
supposedly, God could make all new, all better chemistry and better physics. And he supposedly, so I'm told, fine tune the universe with just the right fundamental constants for everything, for the atoms to hold together, and for planets to be able to coalesce in the first place. And we would not be able to be here if he had not uh, uh, put the numbers in just the right places for everything to work, which implies that he could have made everything different, and it would have been a different, deader universe. But if the universe as we know it right now is God, then there's no reprogramming happening. It just is what it is, and uh, the, 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 the God that you're proposing wouldn't be able to step outside of it and tinker with the universe from a higher perspective.
Yeah. So there's no reprogramming. Um, I would describe there as being some amount of reprogramming. So like, okay, you as an individual person decide who you are going to have children with, right? And so in that sense, you are taking control over your evolution. But obviously, in aggregate, evolution is not happening like as a conscious choice, right?
Right, that would be one of the. I'll, I'll just say yes and let you continue.
Okay. So similarly, like God doesn't sort of reproduce, but God certainly does do sort of micro moment to moment. I would describe it the universe. I'm saying God, but the universe slash God um, is doing moment to moment collective action, as in all of the animals in the universe are doing collective action. Um, but that doesn't mean that it's actually directly responsible for all of the evolution that's happening to it, right?
Right, because they're operating on two different levels. Like we don't have control over evolution. We don't control what genes get replicated or what mutations happening or how natural selection will happen on us. We can try it with other animals, but we don't know. But that's out of our control. Whereas collective action would, by many human beings working towards a common goal, that would be a little bit different. That's entirely within our action.
Right. So I would say, yeah. I guess I'm struggling to see the distinction there, right? Like in terms of, with respect to itself, I don't think the universe is omnipotent or omnipresent or omniscient,
Mm-hmm.
right? It does not have the ability to change itself, to change the entire universe, however it pleases. But with respect to its cells, if you will, with respect to the individual atoms, the individual humans or animals inside of it, I think it's pretty dang close.
Yeah, I may have to chew on that one a little bit more.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
yeah, it's like I said from the beginning. I think I think we agree up to a point. And I don't like arguing semantics and word definitions because I think that gets bogged down very quickly. Like we have discussions from people who like we have discussions within the atheist community about what specifically it means to be an atheist,
Mhm.
whether you assert no God or just say you don't happen to believe in one. And I politely back out of those discussions because it is irritating. And I think in this case, I think it kind of comes down to a question of when it is and is not appropriate to use the word God. And maybe maybe we should focus on the stuff that we agree about, maybe instead of the word God, because I think that
Sure.
there's a lot of kind of what I was saying. There's a lot of baggage there, and I would love to see you argue with more theistic people
Yeah.
about God definitions, because I'm kind of in a weird position where I'm taking the Christian side for the sake of a debate,
Hmm.
and it's like I'll put on my Christian hat for sure.
Yeah.
It's a little old and dusty, but I will still break it down every once in a while. But I will say this: I did, in the process of getting prepared for this, I learned more about insect collective hive mind activity than I knew before.
It's
So,
super cool. Yeah, it's
yeah,
super
it's
cool.
really like I thought. Okay, full disclosure, I thought you were legit wrong about all that stuff, and then I looked more about it and about how bees
Hmm.
direct find ways to uh, direct everyone to a new hive by individuals getting the by individual actors forming a consensus within the colony through dance apparently,
Yeah.
which is really trippy. So I learned something, and that is groovy. Um, but so
Yeah. So to your point about like trying to speak with theists, I'm struggling. I'm
uh,
struggling for a couple of reasons. First off, um, I don't know how to like get in contact with them. That's a little bit difficult in my mind.
uh,
But the larger part is that I don't know what that conversation would look like. Because if you're willing to admit that you're taking a leap of faith, which I would describe, I know you don't want to get into the inner atheist arguments, but within the atheist perspective, if you're saying that you are confident, that you're 100% sure, and not agnostic in the slightest, not uncertain in the slightest about it, that you're 100% sure that there's no God, or if you're 100% sure that there is a God, both of those things in my mind take a leap of faith. And if you're willing to take a leap of faith, um, then I'm struggling, right? It's very difficult to have like an argument at the level of philosophy
mhm,
with a person who's willing to admit that they are not getting to their point from a logical perspective.
mhm. Yeah, so just to clarify, because we have this conversation a lot with Christians, when you say leap of faith,
Mhm.
are you talking about faith in terms of, are you talking about like a leap of blind faith here, or are you talking about something more akin to just standard confidence in the truth of a proposition?
So so there are a couple of different levels. There are like mathematical axioms, right? So an axiom is something that we universally agree on. You can't actually prove it, but it's something that everyone agrees on. So
Hmm.
like if A equals A, right? That's something that we universally agree on.
Hmm.
Something like that. Uh, or excuse me, if A equals B, then B equals A. Whatever it is. These are axioms. These are things that everyone will agree on. It's just universally not something that is discussed. Um, I would argue that the claim that colonies are um, collectively intelligent to be pretty dang close to being an axiom, right? It's not literally, because obviously you were saying earlier that you hadn't known it, but it's pretty dang close,
Hmm.
right? Something like this book that I found is just true is not an axiom, right? It's just not a mathematical axiom. Um, Something like I know for sure that even though we have no idea whatsoever how the universe was created, like why life exists in the first place, or why matter exists in the first place, for you to be 100% confident that it wasn't God, that seems like a leap of faith to me. I don't think you can logic your way into complete certainty either in or in the absence of God.
Right. Yeah. And to be clear, my perspective, whether or not I'm using the word atheist correctly, is I've been presented with a lot of God propositions that haven't met their burden of proof.
Sure.
People have proposed all sorts of and then this is where you're different, is that you're not proposing a being. Most people I talk to are proposing that there is some being out there that is very interested in human behavior, created us all, and wants us to not get gay married or something. That varies, but
Yeah.
if you're talking about God's closer to the universe as a whole and the operations therein, then I'm pretty confident that the universe exists. Like I said, it's more of a semantic disagreement.